after our reintroductory video last week that we were supposed to be starting off with some family games, but I happened to be doing fried potatoes and onions today and wanted to do some rolls for the family. And I wanted to share my new recipe because we've been using this one for quite a while, since the original bread recipe that I had done, it's been probably 3 years ago. But the same as with that recipe, we will be using the same dough for many things. And one of the things we were going to make today was a simple fried donut. So that's really how this all got started today, and we just wanted to share this with you. So if you watched our previous bread making recipe, they're very similar, just a few different things added to it. You start off the same basis. I know in my original recipe, I believe I used water and milk. This one calls for strictly water. And that's one reason why I started playing around with the recipes. We were having trouble with, one of our children had some severe food sensitivities, not allergies, they were food sensitivities. And we were also having trouble finding good milk. Our goats were dried out, and we couldn't find a good source of organic milk near us. So we decided that if we couldn't find the quality of food that we wanted to put before our family, we were going to have to alter some things. And that's how this recipe came about, that we came across, but we really love it. We like it a whole lot better than the other. So to start with, you're going to add the water, and again, I'm really bad at measurements, but I try really hard, because my older sons are doing some cooking, so I try real hard to make a mental note of just how much I'm pouring in there or adding to the recipe. And I'm trying to do this so no one thinks I'm crazy and says, well, what am I supposed to do? Each recipe or each batch calls for approximately 2 cups of liquid. I make anywhere from 3 to 4 batches at a time. So I will start off with 6 cups of water, and then if my liquid is too hot for me, before I can add the yeast, it will go up to 4 batches. So and the water does need to be hot, and only because it should be warm anyways, but only because I have it hot because I usually put butter in here. You can use olive oil. I used to use olive oil a lot. I just put half a cup of butter in. It typically, per batch, if it's, let's say you're making a single batch, 2-cup batch, you could get away with a quarter to a half of a cup of butter, or a stick of butter. I'm doing sticks. I don't have any fresh butter. So you'd use a quarter to a half a stick for a single batch. When you're using a liquid fat like olive oil, I would use a quarter of a cup for each batch. So for 3 batches, it'd be 2/3 of a cup, or for 4 batches, it'd be a full cup. But when it's with butter, the most I usually put in is a stick. So I know it's kind of contradictory, but it works fine. It has a good consistency, good quality, and then that way we just reserve a little bit on the amount of butter that we're consuming. Then per 2-cup batch, I use approximately, a rough tablespoon of salt. And so for this one, I'm just going to put in 3 up to 4, because I'm pretty sure I'll be going up to 4 batches here. Same thing as with the liquid fats. The sugar is the same way. I typically use grade B maple syrup, but I'm out, so I'll use organic sugar instead. For the sugars, I use instead of the maple syrup, I'll use the organic sugar, and it'll be a quarter cup per batch. And assuming I'm going to end up with a full 4 batches, I'll use a full cup of sugar. Usually what I do at this stage is I add oatmeal, but because I'm going to be making donuts, I will not add oatmeal. Oatmeal will typically cool down the liquid mixture so I can add the yeast safely without worrying about it being too hot, where if it's too hot it's going to kill the yeast off. So that's where the extra 2 cups of liquid come in. I will add cold water to it. So once I've got everything in there, I just use my finger to test the temperature. You need it warmer than room temperature, and sometimes it's going to be kind of hot. I wish I could be more accurate for you. You want the water warm enough where you can keep your finger in it for a second or two, but you don't want it so cold, where it's almost room temperature, lukewarm. So mine's a little hot still, and I've got up to 2 cups of water, so I'm going to add about half of that. Check it. Stir everything in while it's hot so it dissolves well. And that's really, I really don't want to add any more. So I've got 3.5 batches. So I'm just going to treat it like it was a full 4 batches. Per batch, again, being 2 cups of liquid, just like the salt, I'm going to add a tablespoon. So I will add almost 4 tablespoons. Just gently stir your yeast in. See how the yeast, it's grainy right now, and you give it about 5 minutes and it will, what we call proof, it'll become foamy. So I'll show you that again in a minute. But while this proofs, I want to talk to you about flour for a minute. For a long time, dealing with flour, I was happy as long as I could get unbleached flour. And I realized, we had wheat berries, we like the whole grain flour, but if I was dealing with wheat flour or unbleached flour was good. And then I went to, I became happier when I started to understand about the chemicals in our food, and so I went for chemical-free, not necessarily organic, but chemical-free unbleached flour. When my son started to develop the food sensitivities that he had, we were shocked to find out that flour was one of the problems that he was having. Flour often has additives put into it, and to stabilize the shelf life. You will hear they're added for other things, for nutrition, but when we contemplate what they're really added for, the fact that, first off, what's added back to the wheat berry that has been depleted through the processing of grinding, we realize that when they're adding back synthetic vitamins, it's really not a health benefit. It actually becomes a detriment to our health. So we started to learn that many flours had it, and a few did not, a few that are found in your local grocery stores. And we learned that, it makes just as good a product without all those additives as it does without. And actually, we prefer it better. When I have used a few times this past year when I ran out of flour from the bulk store and I could not get my hands on organic flour that was purely just the wheat itself, I could not handle the texture from working with it to actually feeding to my family. Right now what we're using, it's called Golden White. It is organic and it is simply just the wheat berry. If you look on a package of other all-purpose flours, oftentimes you'll find the vitamins or the synthetic additives or vitamins, and most of them are B. You have B3, B1, B2, and B. They're going to read like niacin, iron, riboflavin, folic acid. Well, we're all familiar, especially if you've ever been pregnant, you know how important folic acid is, and it is, but not in a synthetic form. So I really encourage anyone, look at your flour, get to understand what's in your food before you consume it and put it before your family, because it is not beneficial if it's synthetic. It is harmful to our bodies. But this one is mainly, you can order it over the internet. It's hard to find. We have to get it if we can't get it from the bulk food store that we go to, and we go to the local health food store, we pay twice as much. So we really try not to run out. I was starting to say earlier when I was adding the butter, I don't know if we cut out this portion, one of the dogs started barking. Just in case we did, I wanted to go over it again. We do not eat GMOs, and we are pretty much all organic. And I say pretty much all, because in the organic food industry, where the FDA comes in, the foods are allowed to be 95% organic, which leaves 5%, okay? So there's additives and things that they can put on in there that are not GMO-free or organic, that is up to 5%. So you have to be careful if you're on an organic diet. Think about the processed stuff. If you can make it from home, I just encourage everybody, anything you can make from home. And that way you know what the whole food is going into that product. You're not getting tricked with any of the additives that might be there and ruining, it's really hard to eat an organic diet. It's really hard in this day and age to find GMO-free food at a reasonable price. And if you're going to that extent, if you're, working really hard to keep your family from that stuff, then I just encourage you to think about everything you can make from home to do it with the single products. When I say single, just like this, yeast, the flour, and the butter. If you look on the back of a bread wrapper, you'll see all these different additives, even on the organic. And so you just really need to be aware of what's going into your food. The yeast is ready. I'm going to have my son walk the camera over here. So that is the proofing that we're looking for. A little bit left undone, that's okay. It's not a big deal. You can leave it, stir it a little bit more and leave it to let it proof on its own, or just go ahead and add your flour, which is what we're going to do. All right, now we're back to the problem of counting out. I can't give you exact number of cups of flour to put in. All I can say is I want you to pay attention to the texture. That's why the video camera is directly into my mixture here. When you start to add your flour, it's going to be a little clumpy, and that's all right. Just stir it, for a few minutes, and then you're going to add more flour, and it's good. Then that's going to turn to a little bit of a soupy paste. Still clumpy, and again, that's okay. The more flour you add, the more you stir, you're going to lose that clumpy. It's going to start to become nice and pasty, and go from pasty to an elastic type texture. As long as you know the texture you're looking for, you can, you'll be able to determine how much flour you need to have in there. And because I could tell you, if we were doing a single batch, I could tell you like 6 cups. But for some odd reason, it could depend on the moisture in the air, the dryness in the air. You may need a little more, you may need a little less. Again, it's going back to the texture of the product. Alright, so this is getting to the point that I usually start working with my hands. And if I jump the gun too much, I usually regret it, because then my hand's a big sticky mess. All part of the job, I suppose. Once we get enough flour worked in, then we'll work into the kneading portion of it. If you add too much flour right away, your bread's going to be very dry, very hard to work with. If you keep your dough too sticky, you're going to have a hard time kneading it. The good thing though is you'd rather add not enough than too much, because you can always add more flour. That's why I'm trying to work in everything around it to make sure. Sometimes the more you knead it, you may think you have just enough in, but as it starts to stick to your hands, you can determine if you want to add a little more. Now, if you don't have a big bowl like this, you can turn it out onto your counter, onto a bread board. A cookie sheet works if you don't want to put it on your counter and get a sticky mess, because you will end up with a little bit of a dough stuck to your counter. When I make this and I use oatmeal, that's really how we like it best. This will be a heavier roll, or a heavier bread or breadstick, whatever you decide to turn it into. The oatmeal helps to reduce the amount of flour required, but it also gives it a little bit of a lighter texture when turning it into the bread or the rolls. Kneading, the more you knead your dough, the lighter your bread is going to be. You don't have to, knead for hours, but several good minutes of kneading, as long as you don't have too much flour in it, will give you a nice light texture. Now, obviously, if you're dealing with a whole wheat, you're not after necessarily too light of a texture. Now, if you don't have a big bowl, again, if you're doing it on the counter, once you're done kneading, you take a towel and lay over your dough so it doesn't dry out. If you think you've got enough flour in there, but you want to knead it a little longer, just sprinkle it with flour to keep your hands from sticking. Working a little more flour in there will be okay. Just don't overkill. All right, so what I've got here is it's to the point where it's not sticking to my hand. So that tells me that I've got just the right amount of flour in there that I want. I've been kneading it for a while. Knead it a couple more times, and then I'm going to put my lid and my bowl on top and let it double itself in size. Now, just so you know, I am not a representative of this company for flour, but this flour is awesome. We've used a lot of different flours that are organic, and this one I just love this one. Everything you make with it tastes good. It works for any recipe you got. They're a very reasonable company for price, and it's USA. So, it's a USA product. Okay, so as I always told my boys when they were little, now it's time to put the dough to sleep, let it take a nap. We'll be back. All right, our dough has risen. We've been gone a little bit longer from here than anticipated, so it's a little bit more than double, but that's okay. It's not a problem. In fact, oftentimes I will make such a big batch of bread that I'm cooking bread for several hours, and if the dough over-rises, you just reshape it and let it set for a few more, and then you're good to go. Now you can tell by the texture. I still have a little flour on top, and that's fine, but you can see some of it's going to be sticky. So usually when you start to work with your dough, you'll sprinkle a little bit more flour on top, simply to keep it from sticking to your hand to make it easier to shape, but not so much flour that you have to worry about kneading it back in. With this, because we're going to do a couple of different things as far as donuts and rolls, I'm just going to show basically the basic shape of a roll and cook that up so you can see the texture of what you're going to get. You can make bread roll or loaves, breadsticks, pizza crust. Now notice when I pull this, I don't pull all the way off. I pull it away so I can pinch. If you pull, it has a tendency to make the dough tough, and you won't know that it's tough until after you cook it. But it does kind of an odd. You kind of think, well, really, but it does. It makes it tough. So. We eat a lot more rolls than we do bread because you can do anything with a roll that you can do with a loaf of bread, and it just, one of our sons prefers it. Easier to just grab instead of cutting. I know it's kind of a lazy thing, I guess, I don't know, but you always got to heel when you do a roll. Now once you've made the item that you're making, roll, loaf, breadstick, you're going to let this rise to double just like you did the dough when you first kneaded it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this aside and let it rise before I put it in the oven. Our rolls have doubled in size, so we're ready to bake them. You want your oven good and hot, but there's the trick again. I don't have a thermometer on my oven that's accurate. My thermometer on my oven is solely for looks, so I do the old-fashioned hand test. If my hand goes in and can sit in there, it's too cool. If my hand goes in and I can't, I feel like the hair's burning off my arms right away, too hot. You want to put your hand in and be able to leave it there for just a second, but be ready to pull it out. So that's how they used to do it in the old days, and it's the only way I tell you. I'm going to guess maybe on a conventional oven, 350, maybe 375. I guess it depends on the oven. Everything cooks different. Electric and gas are different than wood. So, one of those things, just like the texture of your dough, playing with the temperature of your oven. Our rolls are done. They're good and slightly brown on the bottom. Sometimes I like them a little browner, but the tops indicate that they're done. We'll just lightly butter them. And then we'll call that good. I'll show you the inside of one. That's how the rolls look with this bread recipe.